The Boxing Day Test had more layers than Nana's Christmas trifle. From teen opener Sam Konstas' audacious Test debut innings to his mid-pitch tangle with Virat Kohli, and the insipid penalty handed out to the Indian superstar, to Steve Smith's second straight century, his 34th Test ton, to another down payment of Jasprit Bumrah's mastery, 9 wickets for the match. And a reminder of Pat Cummins' craft as he led the Australian attack to a famous Day 5 victory on his way to Man of the Match honours.
A Boxing Day Test for the ages. Australia, who come out on top on Day 5.
To the tale of two tales, wagging their teams back to life. To a maiden century from India all-rounder Nitish Kumar Reddy, officially anointing him as the next big thing. To the batting struggles of India veterans Kohli and captain Rohit Sharma, and West Australian all-rounder Mitch Marsh. To Sharma's on-field admonishment of young gun Yashasvi Jaiswal after he dropped Marnus Labuschagne, and the backlash that followed from fans and commentators. To India legend Sunil Gavaskar's description of Rishabh Pant's first innings dismissal as stupid, stupid, stupid. To Australia's mystifying refusal to declare late on Day 4 or even before the first ball on Day 5, giving India a fighting chance, but then finding a way to win anyway and go 2-1 up in the series. To some snicko controversy in the fading moment, all watched by a record MCG aggregate crowd of 350,000 plus. The most bums on seats for a Melbourne Test since Don Bradman led the Aussies in 1936-37, when matches were played over 6 days. Yes, this Test match had it all. Jackson Barrett, chief cricket writer for the West Australian, joins the West Sports Show from Melbourne. And Jacko, what a test, what a crowd, so much to unpack. And I will add to my highlights that it was also record ratings for Channel 7. Unbelievable Test match.
Hey, Quarters. Yeah, it was really special to be at the MCG, to be honest. It was, like I wrote tomorrow, that it was kind of just a test that had it all. And you're right, there is so much to go through. But the first day was really special. A big crowd, Konstas, but you kind of expected all of those things. And today, being Day 5, had another element to it where I don't remember the last time that there was a Day 5 crowd like it. So it was 74,000. And it was fascinating just the way it built in Melbourne. So they announced last night that there'd be $10 tickets. They're a donation to Pathway Cricket and cricket for people with a disability and that sort of thing. And free for kids. And then by all reports, the phone lines at CA and Ticketmaster and wherever just absolutely melted down. I think they announced that at about 5 p.m. yesterday, late in the day's play on Day 4. And by the end of the night, they'd sold 50,000. The test for 4 days had everything. And for a little while today, it didn't feel like we were going to get the climax that it deserved. And then we got it. I think one of the great parts about it is Scott Boland bowling at the MCG. We love a West Aussie, like a hometown favourite, but the relationship he has with Bay 13, he's this really reserved and quiet guy. And they just go absolutely bunter for him all the time, whether he's bowling, fielding. When he was batting on the evening of Day 4, they cheered every run. And there was one ball that he carved away kind of over gully and ran down to Bay 13, and it was possibly the loudest up until the winning wicket that the test had been. So, yeah, it was an epic test. It had absolutely everything. It's worthy of being our highest ever attended test match in Australia, and Pat Cummins says it sits right up the top in his career as well, and he's played a few test matches now. So, yeah, it was unbelievable.
All Boland is missing, all that's missing from his repertoire and his relationship with Bay 13 is some calisthenics Merv Hughes style, because he's probably the last. And mate, I can put my hand up and say I was one of those members of Bay 13 who was in the background doing the stretches and the weird exercises that Merv, we were just mimicking Merv.
Well, I don't think it's Scotty's go, but it was Sam Konstas' go, and I'm sure we'll talk more about him. But this guy was like you've plucked a 19-year, other than that he's very good at cricket, it was like you'd plucked a 19-year-old out from the stands and put him on the MCG. You could see him looking up to the top of the MCG all the time. He was always watching Bay 13. At one point, he was down at the punt road end, and I'm at about, deep backward point or something, and I'm actually not sure he watched the ball being bowled. He was busy looking at the crowd and taking everything in, and he was so up for the contest and up for being amongst things and being around his teammates. He was the first in when they were tossing up a review and that sort of thing. And one of the things he did was took a liking to Bay 13, and they reciprocated that in spades. So that was a lot of fun to watch.
Feels like there was highlights every day, both on and off the field and sort of non-action too. But let's talk about snicko. Let's talk about Jaiswal's dismissal. The right decision was made, in my opinion. Clearly, the right decision. It's not always about technology. And he would have been kind of lucky, wouldn't he? Because he was pretty much out and given not out earlier on by DRS. So what's your take on that? And what did Pat Cummins have to say on it?
Pat was pretty firm on this in that he just said it was clearly out. He's like, you could see the deviation. They, I think, felt like they heard something. And then the big giveaway from the Australian players was that Jaiswal really slumped his head, and they saw that as an acknowledgement that after they'd reviewed it, he kind of went, well, I'm done here. So Pat kind of saw it that way. He feels that the right decision was arrived at, and I agree with that as well. I also like that there's a bit of adaptability in the DRS, that, the technology is not always going to be right, but that there's some common sense involved, and I think that's really important in those situations, and I think they did a good job. Third umpire hasn't got them all right. This week there was the Siraj one at the start of yesterday where it clearly didn't hit the ground on the way through, that they have been criticised for not having enough looks at. But I really like the fact that they didn't rely on the technology. And it sounds as if, the feedback coming from the people that run that, part of the technology is that it was just a graze, and sometimes it just can't pick it up. And it didn't. So, yeah, the right decision. It was a good call, and it was a big part of the game because Jaiswal made 84. He was the damn wall, so to speak, for much of the day, and he batted really well. He was disappointed to get out. You mentioned there he was flat about first one. He was hit on the pads by Mitchell Starc. He had a bent back leg. It hit him just above the knee roll, and was given not out, then reviewed and given not out on umpire's call. It was one of those funny ones with the DRS where it just felt out. You get hit on the back leg, your back leg's bent, you've been hit in line. It was just all there. Joel Wilson, who's tormented the Aussies a few times across the last few years, he was there in Headingley in 2019. And it just felt off, that one. So Jaiswal, maybe a little bit lucky early, but I think the right call was made for the second.
You're right with the non-declaration at the end of day 4 and then coming out about at the start of day 5?
Yeah, I am. Marnus actually did the post-match presser after day 4, and he was really good in that he just said, ideal scenario for us is that we would have had a bowl like them last night. And that's clear because opening batters will tell you that there's no worse time. Two things I don't like is facing a very small number of overs where they know that it's a bit of a lose-lose. Like if they...
you can't win at all.
You can't win. If you get set, you got to go home and have a kip and come back tomorrow. And the other thing that they don't like is not knowing when they're batting. So in that respect, I would have liked to have seen a declaration, but Marnus and Pat have spoken and both basically said they didn't feel like they had enough runs. Pat wanted above 300. They had that. They had 333 overnight. They ended up with 339, the lead that is. So, look, I mean, in hindsight, they had plenty of time. They made sure that they gave themselves enough overs to have quite a few overs at the death, so to speak, with the second new ball. So that came into their thinking as well. And I think they knew that, if Nathan Lyon and Scott Boland had a bit of a dip this morning, it wasn't going to take up too much of anyone's day anyway. So I think, right decision was made, and they should be praised for that because it was a gutsy one. The conventional thinking would have been to bowl last night.
It was. My only argument was Jaiswal didn't have a good day in the field yesterday. We saw the reaction of his captain, which was a pretty poor one. But I just thought maybe with a few doubts in his mind, maybe a couple of overs at the end of play. But look, you can't dispute the way it's rolled out because they've had a great victory today. So fair play to them. It was a really brave call, and they're 2-1 ahead in the Border Gavaskar series. So let's go back to day 1. There's so many highlights in this test, but for me, Konstas, first over against Bumrah, playing and missing, and wasn't it the play and miss test? I know we did see a few edges, but geez, there's a lot of play and misses in this test. But I just love the way you could see his mind ticking over, and it was, I'm just not going to stick with this. I'm going to take this on. And we saw the ramp shots, et cetera, et cetera. So wonderful debut. And, second innings got the Jaffa. So that's Test cricket.
Yeah, clearly this was one of the real highlights of the Test match. And I feel like if the Test petered out into nothing over the next 4 days, we still would have had this really amazing Sam Konstas debut. He's basically flipped the script on, in many ways, the Australian top order's relationship with Bumrah. I mean, Bumrah is easily the best bowler in the series. It's an historic series that he's having. But it was that complete flip in mindset. It was, how can I score against this guy? Came up with unconventional ways of doing that. He executed them pretty well. And the first over, like some experts have kind of indicated that, like, there was a lot of sideways movement out there the whole Test, and they were balls that he was playing well inside of, and they're ones that he probably gets bad on if they don't deviate as much as they did. And Bumrah, was special in that first over. That stands up as one of the better overs of the game, and he rode that out. Khawaja rode that out as well in the first couple, and then just to be honest, mate, like the guts to try a ramp with his 11th ball, do it again with his 14th ball, and then do it again and flush one, and then do it again, was pretty special. He recognised that they weren't going to have that back wall set up, the third man fine leg all the time, and they were a little bit wider and when they were there, and he was able to play that shot. And it's premeditated, so a lot of them were bloody good balls that he was doing it to, but that's the nature of that kind of stroke play, and he did it really, really well. And then the rest of his shots were really good as well. Like he took him through mid-wicket, and he took him over cover and over long on and that sort of thing. So yeah, it was pretty special. We're going to see a lot more from this guy. He has clearly settled in incredibly well in the group. Even just watching him at training on Christmas Day, just mingling with people and chatting to people, and I'm sure naturally there'd be a bit of unease there walking into the Australian Test team where no one's any younger than 11 years. There's no less than an 11 years age gap between any of them.
Yeah, well, he's 19, no 20-year-olds, all 30 plus in that team. And we shouldn't forget, he's a 19-year-old, Boxing Day, it doesn't get any bigger, facing the best bowler in the world, bit of sideways movement, and he's managed to pull that off. So it's magnificent. Travis Head, who's been very, very good, but probably our best batter during the series, consistency-wise. Yeah. Twin failures. So I think it was a win for the Australian top order. Khawaja graphs out a 50. Steve Smith, 140, so back-to-back tons. And, of course, Marnus with a couple of 70s. So top order is a real tick for Australia, given that Travis Head didn't have such a good Test match with the bat. Yeah, it's a massive tick. And on that, I think a lot of the credit there has to go to Konstas. And Cummins said something similar this afternoon. The way that he, Bumrah tends to bowl not much more than 6 overs, but the over before he came off in his first spell of the Test went for 18 runs. So he essentially, batted him out of the attack in a way. And it just kind of changed that dynamic early in the Test. It meant that Khawaja clearly had to do some graft as well, but then I felt like they were towed along a little bit. And then Labuschagne was coming in at 1 for 89, and Smith was coming in at 2 for 100 odd. And Smith looked great. Smith, I think, looked better than he did in Brisbane. He looked more in control of his game. There were more purposeful strokes early in his innings. A little bit of pressure off too with the century. Yeah, pressure off with the century, and pressure off with the fact that he wasn't coming in facing Bumrah with the new ball. It was a completely different ball game for the rest of Australia's top order. And a lot of credit to Konstas. The middle order missed out, but Head and Mitch Marsh are there to hurry things along when they're in that kind of position. And it didn't work out for them in either innings, but you can see how that kind of dynamic there would work. What about Mitch Marsh's struggle? So 4 and 0, 10 overs in total with the ball, hasn't reached double figures since the West Test. Where's he at? Can you see a change for the Sydney Test? And if so, is it going to be a Bo Webster? Is it going to be a Sean Abbott? Or do they not play an all-rounder? Do they bring in a Jai Richardson? And I guess the other question to extend from that is Mitch Starc didn't seem too distressed today. There were question marks over him overnight, but he plays in Sydney.
Yeah, Cummins has said that he's pretty confident that Mitch Starc plays in Sydney. He described him as a warrior and heaped praise on him for his ability to push through. He said there's never a point where he doesn't make himself an option to bowl, no matter how much pain he's in. And it looked as if he was in quite a bit. He bowled 25 overs in the first innings and another 16. Took one for in the second innings, but bowled without luck. He had the Jaiswal one and a couple of other half chances that he could have taken a few wickets and it been a really impressive spell. They will almost certainly need more bowling coverage in Sydney. It'll be a flat deck. Ricky Ponting hinted to that in the 7 coverage as well. And let's say Starc plays, there'll be some sort of a cloud on his fitness. Yep, I'm sure they will say that if he's put his hand up, he's right to go. But at some point, there could be a breaking point, right? So
this means Mitch plays?
Potentially, they're adamant that Mitch is fit. They're just not using him quite as much. The batting stuff is a different question. So no double-figure scores since the second innings in Perth where he scored 47. His shot to get out in the first innings for 4 was really poor. It was a pull shot that just didn't need to happen so early on. And he skied it and he was caught. And then, he snigged off in the second innings playing not a very confident shot at all either. So the batting is clearly an issue. His bowling in the first innings looked benign. He bowled a better over today. So that's, he bowled some okay overs and he bowled some really pretty poor overs and his pace is down. So there's a watch there as well. I think I would be making a change, given that, they're kind of bracing for Sydney to be a pretty flat wicket. So is it an Abbott?
Is it a Webster? Or do you bring in a Quick?
I think it's a Webster.
Do you bring in a Jai?
I think it's a Webster for me because there's that element of he can bowl his off spin as well. It's tall off spin, so it's something, a little bit different to Nathan Lyon. Not markedly different, but it's something. It's a different trajectory. And his seamers have been going really well in the shit. And then he was released to play for Melbourne Stars and has taken some key wickets there as well. As much as it doesn't translate overly, it's an indication that they're coming down okay. So I'd probably be looking at Bo Webster for a Test debut. Sean Abbott and Richardson are the other ones. They're obviously the backup quicks in there. The thing with Abbott is that he could open the door for a Kerry bat 6 and Abbott bat 7. That's one that's been raised a little bit. I'd be less inclined to do that with Sean Abbott than I would have been with Michael Neser if he was fit. So for me it's probably a Webster for Marsh swap.
So let's talk about India and let's open with Bumrah because becomes the first bowler in Test history to reach 200 wickets with an average below 20. 29 wickets at 13.24 in this series. We saw his day 4 heroics that had Australia all over the place. Now has 203 wickets from 43 tests at 19.52. Is it too early to rate him? There's been a lot of talk throughout this test on is he India's best ever quick. So he might have Srinath, 236 wickets in 67 tests at 30.49. But for me, he hasn't got Kapil Dev yet. It's no slide on Bumrah. I think he's probably is going to be. But I think he just needs a bit of longevity there in the career before we start comparing with someone like a Kapil Dev, as good as he's been.
Correct on the longevity front. I think Mitchell Johnson 13-14 Ashes in my lifetime is the other period of bowling or series of bowling that it kind of stacks up with for me. I spoke to Trent Copeland during this test, and he is a 7 cricket analyst. He's a expert in fast bowling, and he doesn't reckon he's ever seen anyone bowl better in Australia. I asked him about touring quicks, and he goes, I don't know if anyone's bowled better. It was pretty special.
Lillian Thompson, mid-70s, maybe?
Yeah, it was pretty special, and just it's 145 Ks, it's a short run up, and all the players say, as arbitrary as that seems, it just gets on you a little bit quicker. And then there's the angle of the arm, his wrist speed, and the power that comes out of his wrist, which is obviously different. And then he just doesn't bowl many bad balls. He's relentless. He hits this beautiful length all the time. And some of the balls, the ball to Alex Carey in the second innings, just absolutely jagged and was basically unplayable. Same with some of the ones to Konstas and Khawaja in the first 10 minutes on day 1. So it's special what he's doing. There's a stat that I've pulled out a couple of times in this test that he's now taken 30 wickets. He needs 9 more to pass Maurice Tate's 100-year-old record for most wickets by a touring player in a series in Australia. That was a 5-test Ashes series. So there's a bit of a watch on that because there's 20 wickets still to get and 9 is about his share. I did an analysis yesterday around like how less is more for him and these like short, sharp spells and the way that between him and Sharma and team management, they basically handpick which overs that Jasprit is bowling. And
so really the bowlers, there's spells around what he does.
Yeah, exactly.
Really,
I mean, there was one where Akashdeep had started and Bumrah came on and had 2 overs. I think it might have been early in the bowl and line partnership where they were just trying to knock it on the head. And then they're clearly conscious of his load, of his like bowling loads as well. So Akashdeep came back on. So Akashdeep has warmed up, bowled 1 or 2 overs, been yanked, and then been called back on. So he bowled 10 spells in each innings. Most of them the break is between 3 and 9 overs, which really isn't a hell of a lot when you think about the way that most sides roll through their bowlers like that. So yeah, it completely shapes what they do as a bowling.
Took 9 wickets. 9 wickets.
It was special, and one of the better stats is that he took 4 for 99 in the first innings, and 99 was I think 11 runs more than he'd ever conceded.
I read that in your article. Before, it's amazing.
Which is amazing. And then because he's bowled on some tips around the place, and then he hadn't been hit for 6 since 2021. He was hit for 4 in the first innings here. So
I couldn't believe that stat.
It's a stunning stat. So Konstas is also only the second man to hit him for 2 sixes in a career. So that speaks to
his first ever test innings.
Yeah, that speaks to like that, how that different approach works. But yeah, Bumrah, incredible. The numbers tell the story, and it's one of the great things to watch.
Nitish Kumar Reddy, maiden test ton, was at the start of something great. Was at the anointing a great all-rounder.
Yeah, it feels like it. This is his first series. It was a condition-based selection. I think he will become a batting all-rounder. I think maybe he arrived on these shores, more of a, we saw him as more as bowler, but his batting has been remarkable. He's got their highest average now, that 100, and the way he worked with it's like an elongated tail sort of with these like bowling all-rounders in the back end of it. But yeah, it was really, really impressive. He faced a lot of Cummins, he faced a lot of Stark bowling some heat. When Nathan Lyon found a little bit of turn, he played that really, really comfortably as well and looked great. And then the late in the day storm closing in 100 on day 3 was awesome as well. His dad was in the crowd. There were great television shots of his dad crying.
What a beautiful celebration as well.
Yeah, his dad's been a megastar around the MCG for the last couple of days. And yeah, I think it is the start of something. He's young. It's his 4th test, and they've got to back him in now. And it'll be interesting to see how they use him in home conditions, because his bowling hasn't been overly threatening, but it feels like he deserves a spot in that side as a stick at the moment.
And let's not forget Jaiswal, 23, I think, 82 and 84 in a really tough test. That's real class there, right there. Questions, Kohli, last test in Australia next week, SCG, 20% of the match fee. Now, I hated that. I thought that was clear indication who runs international cricket now, and it's obviously the BCCI. It's not the ICC. That for me is a 1-match ban. I didn't like it. I thought it was the behaviour of a bully. But, 20%, it's not going to scratch the surface. So Kohli, obviously not batting, made some runs in the first innings, but and Rohit Sharma. So who plays in Sydney, but is that the last time we're going to see him in red ball cricket?
I think he plays in Sydney. To be honest, the Indian press back didn't go quite as hard at him in the post-match presser as I thought they may have. He's under immense pressure, and they've moved heaven and earth to try and get him back into form, and rightly so, I suppose, because he's the captain. But he came in the middle order. Now he's displaced KL Rahul, who was their most assured and their leading run scorer among specialist batters, Nitish's side. So they've displaced him, and he's looked really, really poor. He looks slow through his strokes. He looked better for maybe 15 balls this morning, like he was playing the ball behind his front pads. He was playing it a little bit later and left it a little bit better. But the first innings was just completely underwhelming. It was a shocking shot. The second innings wasn't a great shot either. So, look, I think for the sake of him being the captain and a great of Indian cricket, it sounds as if he plays in Sydney, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's the second retirement for them on the tour. I think Kohli goes on beyond this. It's a funny place in their cycle where
probably not. We won't see him again here. Obviously, that's
we would be very shocked if we saw him again here. I thought his actions on day one were like of a bully, but more of a hothead. He did it at the airport with a journalist. He did it at Mumbai airport with a journalist. Apparently, he told, this is before I lobbed, but apparently he had journalists ordered to be quiet around the nets so that he could bat. He barged into Konstas on the first day, went out of his way to do it. And then there was the vision emerged that night of him doubling back on the night of day two after he got out, doubling back to confront a fan and kind of had to be cooled off there as well. So pretty disappointing. Like we've spoken about it before, but he came to Australia and this was very much like the farewell tour, and the public sentiment around him had shifted like really quite significantly, but it's shifted again now.
Shifted back, and it's all of his own making.
Yeah,
it's
100%.
It's not reflective of the Australian public at all, the media. It's certainly all of his making. Finally, let's talk about the World Test Championship scenario because, of course, it's quite significant, the result of this test. South Africa qualified for the championship overnight at Centurion. And interesting stat there, Jacko, they've called on 30 players across 11 tests to get there. So very different to the Australian team. Australia, India and Sri Lanka remain in the mix. This is the math. If Australia wins the SCG Test, they're in. They're into the Test Championship final. Lords, I think it's in June. Alternatively, a draw would mean that 2 draws against Sri Lanka in that 2-test series in late Jan, early Feb would be enough. And of course, we've seen Sri Lanka there in recent times. They're going to be bloody hard to beat. So that's not a given that we even draw both tests there. But look, they're 2-1 ahead now. It's a series that we haven't had since 2017. We have a trophy we haven't held since 2017. Box seat now. What do you think? How do we approach the SCG Test?
I think the way they approach it certainly will change marginally. The fact that they've won it, I mean, they obviously won't tell you this, but Sri Lanka is going to be a really, really difficult challenge. And I think knocking off India again would certainly make that a little bit easier. I think it is probably underestimated just how hard Sri Lanka is going to be a little bit. So I think they'll still be really desperate to win. They haven't beaten India in 2 tests in the same series for a decade. So to put 3 on them, like we talk about, and it's been written a lot this week about how this series shapes this generation, and they haven't entirely shied away from that either. I think 3-1 sounds a lot better to them than 2-1 or 2-0. Obviously 2-0 would be a drawn series and India retains the trophy. So I don't think there'll be a hell of a lot of caution in Australia. I think they'll be up there to largely win the test until it comes to crunch time. Like, if they were in a similar situation to what India were today, then it would likely come into their thinking. But I think that'd be something that comes into their heads late on.
Jacko, appreciate you stepping away from a very busy night where you've got lots to write. Have loved your coverage. It's been exceptional across the test. And I look forward to reading what you've got to say tomorrow.
Thanks, Quarters. Cheers.